Good evening, Energy Rogue Nation. Welcome back to another weather discussion. Thank you all so much for tuning in, and happy Thursday to each and every one of you. Boy, we really made it through the week, guys. This was fantastic. This is great. A lot of crazy things happening, both from the geopolitical perspective, the economy, natural gas, crude oil. Right? We've seen a lot of that craziness going on for this week. It's really been jam-packed. But we've also had a lot of crazy with our weather. And we're going to talk about that tonight, but just a preface on what you can expect here for tonight's discussion. We are going to be breaking it up into two videos. So the first one is going to be focused on the United States as far as short-term cooling and heating degree days, as well as taking a look at our winter outlook for 2024-2025. We've given a forecast prior to this back in August, early September, for those of you that have been following. But we need to give you an update on if anything has changed on that or anything that we are starting to notice. So you want to stay tuned for both of those discussions throughout the video tonight. But this really is part one. Part two, which will be in a second video, is going to be focused on European weather. Same format. We're going to be talking about short-term CDD, HDD over the next couple of weeks for Eastern and Western Europe. But also we're going to focus, just like in the first one, talking about the winter outlook for that part of the world. Stay tuned for both of those, but as I said, there are going to be two separate videos posted here tonight on the channel. In the meantime, if you have any questions about anything we discussed during tonight's discussions, feel free to post those questions down in the Discord channel labeled Weather Rogue. Happy to answer any questions that you have. One other programming announcement before we do get started tonight, and I do want to give a quick shout out to Cash for giving me some guidance on this project, but I will be putting together other historical data for the remaining EIA regions. If you're unfamiliar with what I'm talking about, Cash had actually done a phenomenal job at pointing me in this direction, but I have developed some visual graphics of data with 15 to 30 year climate historicals for the EIA regions in the United States. So if you're wondering what that all means, you can check out my post earlier on in the Weather Rogue Discord channel where I do show a demonstration of that. That was only highlighting the New England region, but what I am in the process of putting together is a graphic for every single region within our EIA portfolio. So be on the lookout for that. I think it's going to be incredibly useful. A lot of folks here, many of you, are pretty, I wouldn't even say concerned, but curious about climate normals / historicals for some of these regions, as well as even getting more granular than that. And I think that the product you see on that channel in the Discord server does help to address some of that. It doesn't go as granular as I would like, and that's going to require more of grunt work on my behalf. But I personally think it should suffice for the time being while we continue to build out other products. So if you're curious about that, check it out. Posted earlier on in the week an example of this, but be on the lookout for some of those additional charts on other EIA regions. Hopefully by this weekend, I should have those up. All right, so tonight's discussion, here we go. Part one, we're going to be focusing here on the United States, and this video will be quite extensive. So you're going to want to buckle up, grab your favorite beverage, and let's hop right into it. I mentioned at the top of the video, there's a lot of crazy stuff happening in the United States on so many different levels, but the one that people aren't really talking about is the weather component. Let me give you an example of that. We're taking a look here at College of DuPage Meteorology, wonderful resource for all things weather. And these red lines you see here are denoting our jet stream. This is especially something I want to bring up to folks here that are new. We talk about this quite a bit. I referenced the jet stream, or in this case, the 500 millibar height map. That is really just a fancy word for saying this is our jet stream. And our jet stream dictates a lot of our weather in the United States and around the world in terms of whether or not you're going to see rainfall or drought, whether or not you're going to see snowfall versus rain, right? or what have you. There's many different things you can derive from a jet stream. And tonight is really no different. But also, our current jet stream also serves the purpose of giving us what's happening right now in the United States, in this case. What our weather is now, so that we understand where we're going. You see, it's so easy for meteorologists to just hop right into the weather models and give you a projection. But the one thing that's been ingrained in me throughout my 4 years in university is that you need to also look at what's happening on the ground right now in order to really see what the weather models are putting out and if it makes sense, because sometimes it doesn't. Right now, as of tonight, here we have down towards the central Gulf of Mexico what is now Major Hurricane Rafael, which at this time in the video, by the time you're watching it, is likely no longer a major hurricane, and it will continue to weaken down to a tropical storm as it continues to move west just to the north of the Bay of Campeche by the time we get to this weekend. This, of course, is a pretty strong deviation in pathing from what we were forecasting even just a couple of days ago, where we thought for a brief period of time that Tropical Storm Rafael, and I hope I said that name right. I apologize if I said Beryl. For some reason I think I said Beryl, but we're going to keep going. But I meant to say Rafael. If I made that mistake, I do apologize. But we expected Rafael to actually make landfall as a tropical storm near the panhandles of Florida, Alabama, and Mississippi. That did not happen, and it's not expected to happen now, as this system has taken a pretty strong westward trajectory away from the U.S. mainland and off towards the west near Mexico. Now, to answer this very quickly without diving too deep into the granular on Rafael tonight, no, I am not expecting much impact to areas of coastal Texas. As a matter of fact, the only thing that would be of indirect impact would likely be some higher waves as a result of the system moving off towards the south. But other than that, not expecting major disruptions, very little to negligible impact in many of these areas due to the fact that the system itself is weakening. Now, for you folks that are concerned about shipping lanes, there may be disruptions there, but in terms of some of these LNG sites, I'm not too particularly concerned about impacts there, so nothing of concern. But as that continues to move off towards the west, the other system that's making headlines is this guy, this cutoff low pressure that's currently to the south of the Four Corner States tonight. And that's bringing a lot of snowfall for the panhandles of Texas, not Texas. I meant to say to the northwest of Texas, out towards the plateaus of New Mexico and even up towards the Central Rockies, the Great Divide, if you will. Seeing some pretty extensive snowfall in these parts and relatively early for this time of year. I think I even saw a stat that said once that's all said and done, Denver, Colorado could see some of the most snowfall this early in the season since I think the early 1990s. Brian, you may have to correct me on that. I don't recall how long you've been in that general vicinity, but I believe that this is a little bit unusual for this time of year, especially for Denver. Can't really say the same for the Central Rockies, but Denver is a pretty unique case in this respect. This system's going to continue, of course, to move off towards the east, and as it does so, it is going to bring some of those cooler temperatures towards the Rockies and the Central Plains. But as you're going to see tonight, our general weather pattern doesn't allow for this cold to stick around very long. But what you will see is that over the next few weeks, especially as we get towards what would be really late November and even into early December, see a little bit of a change there. More on that a little bit later on. But that's the general forecast for the time being. That cutoff low is expected to once again move off towards the east and northeast, bringing some showers and thunderstorms tonight to Oklahoma and Texas. And that convection will continue to move off to the east as well, eventually towards places like the Midwest, the Northeast, and the southeastern United States. And as it does so, as I mentioned already, it is expected to bring some of those cooler than normal temperatures. Don't expect it to last long, though. Final honorable mention is the southern part of California, especially Ventura County, where we are currently seeing what is now dubbed the mountain fire that is currently burned more than 15,000 acres tonight. And that number is expected to rise. I wouldn't even say that that's accurate by the time this video comes out. I think it's going to be a lot higher than that. But that, of course, is a result of a lot of dry air, as well as really strong winds on the back end of this system. For the rest of the country, though, you see because of this cutoff low, you get sort of what we call a split flow, meaning you have your polar jet, which is up towards the northern United States, and then you also have this, call it this subtropical jet that's to the south of the polar jet. Now, when these two varying jet streams run parallel to each other, that's when you get a lot of mild air. You know, I talked about that in my earlier forecast back in August, guys. I said, look, it's going to be mild across the United States for quite a while, at least until December. This is the kind of pattern that I was looking for that we're finally starting to see, at least for a brief period of time, and that is that zonal pattern where you're not seeing a wavy jet stream at all. No, quite the contrary. Instead, you are seeing pretty horizontal flow, west to east flow across the area boxed in with that black highlight. That typically implies that we're not talking about cold, we're not talking about warm, we're just talking about lukewarm/mild. And for you folks that are trying to track heating degree days, that's not something you want to see. This is a pretty mild and pretty bearish pattern we're in, if I could say so myself, with the exception being the Rockies. But when we talk about areas that are higher in population, we're really not focused so much on the Rockies. It's actually a lower population density, and so the areas getting the coldest temperatures are areas that with the least population density, or I should say population, in the entire lower 48. So that is the current pattern that we're dealing with right now, and you can thank an area of high pressure that's off towards the Pacific right now in the central and northern Pacific that's helping to keep this pattern overall progressive, with the exception of tonight. But because of that progressive pattern overall, it is why we're seeing a lot of variation in our temperature regime. Look no further than WXRogue.com. Gosh, that's a tongue twister. WXRogue.com. Look no further. This is, I think, a great representation on a more chart visual basis on what we're experiencing in the United States. So look at this, for example. If you take a look at, let's say, our population-weighted heating degree days, right? Look at this chart here. Yes, we see increases in our heating degree days in the next 7 to 14 days, which would essentially imply more of a bullish pattern in terms of heating. But if you really think about it, while that pattern looks like we're going to have more heating degree days, it makes sense. Look at how many heating degree days we're talking about. We're not really talking about a lot. And even so, if we contrast that to our cooling degree days, we also don't see a lot of cooling degree days either. So just to be clear, it's not like we're seeing really warm and hot temperatures for this time of year for most of the United States, but we're also not seeing really cold temperatures. And remember, for HDD and CDD, we're focused on that benchmark of 65 degrees to determine that magnitude of how cold or how hot. And in this case, yeah, you can look at these charts and make this distinction that, you know, by the time we get to, say, November 15th to November 18th, we're going to be seeing an uptick in heating degree days, but it's not a lot. It's still pretty bearish. So the question that I continue to see from folks in Energy Rogue, the subscriber base, you, the viewer, the question that I keep getting, when are we going to see the cold? Because by what even NOAA's putting out with probabilities of above normal temperatures being high for the eastern United States and below normal temperatures for the West Coast and the Rockies, that doesn't really bode well for, you know, a cold regime, right? I mean, we're into November and it's still pretty darn mild, and in this case, well above normal. So the question that continues to be asked tonight, and will continue to be asked for the next couple of weeks, when is the cold getting here? When will winter truly arrive for the areas that we're concerned about for this season, which is the Northeast and the Central United States? Well, tonight, let's take a look at that. Let's look at some of those models and jump right into it. I will show you here, this is one of our climate models, the Climate Forecast Simulation version 2. And I'm also, in this case, going to put on the 500 millibar map. Let's actually zoom out here and go to North America. So this is our jet stream, as you can tell. And when I'm looking for cold air, I really am looking for an opportunity for low pressures, what we call circumpolar lows that circle around the North Pole. I look to see, are any of these low pressures going to get displaced by high pressure and then be forced down because of it? Now, that can be caused by a couple different things, and I won't dive into the specifics, but I'll give you two scenarios. Scenario number one is if we have an area of high pressure that pokes out of the northern Pacific, which then brings cold air south to places like the Four Corner States, which is what we're seeing tonight. That in of itself wouldn't necessarily imply cold air for long. As a matter of fact, that would continue to mean warmer air downstream for the Northeast and Midwest in that scenario. Yes, you would have eventual cold air move into the Midwest on the back end of, in this case, the low pressure, but because it's progressive, meaning we have this waving oscillation in our jet, it means that the cold air is pretty much temporary. So I really look for a second scenario when it comes to longer lasting and severe cold. And that is what's called the Greenland block, meaning we get an area of high pressure to set up near Greenland, hence the name, which then, rather than displacing a little low pressure, it displaces a crap ton of cold air that spills into the United States. That is what we look for in terms of those Arctic blasts or the cold air plunge, whatever name you want to dub it. That brings with it a large swath of cold air that impacts not just a sub-region of the United States, but instead a large swath of the country. So if we take this forward in time, we're going to look at a couple of models here. We'll start first this CFS. Keep an eye on the jet stream. That low pressure we looked at in the Four Corner States is now in the Midwest by the time we get to later on this weekend. But notice, we are still progressive, right? Here is that jet stream just cutting across, right? Relatively progressive for the most part. You're going to see that change here over time. Now, as we go forward, you do see that, again, high pressure in the Central Pacific will bring cold air down towards, say, the western and central United States. But look how quickly that trough, or that low pressure here, moves through. It moves pretty damn quick. So play this forward in time. You see it's in and it's out. It's gone. Then, on the heels of that system, you then see another low pressure that digs across the Four Corner States, brings with it warm air advection for the Midwest, the South Central United States, and the Northeast. It's a constant pattern of this that the CFS is picking up on as we head into what would be the second and third week of November. But this is when things get a little bit interesting, because take a look at what happens here. All right, so let's go back a little bit. So if we look at what would be later on November, just before Thanksgiving, we have an area of high pressure that builds out towards Greenland. As that happens, you see that as we play that forward in time, you then begin to see some cold air dig down further south. So that would be a little bit more of a colder air regime. And once again, as a result of that, though, look what happens. So you get that Greenland block to set up, it dissipates, you get more cold air to dig down into the central United States, and much of the United States in that effect. So this pattern that the CFS is picking up on And this is an even better example. This is what I look for in terms of a Greenland block, right? So that first example I brought up, not so great. It's a relatively weak Greenland block, but look what the CFS picks up on by the time we get to December. Look at this. Let's back up a moment. I want to make sure I really drive this home to you folks. Look what happens to your jet. You get this area of high pressure to build out in the western United States. But then as we go forward into December 2nd, off the page you have another ridge that sets up towards Greenland. That brings a ton of this cold air down towards the eastern and central United States. This would take us into the first week of December. So here's what I'm saying in short. And actually, before I conclude that, I want to show the GFS because I think it has a much more bullish case scenario of exactly this. So if we head on towards, for example, the 18th, right? Look at how much cold air is digging down now, right? So you get that ridge, that area of high pressure towards Greenland, right? And I said it's a Greenland block, but you can tell it kind of decays for a bit. But that Greenland block, by definition, is supposed to bring larger quantities of cold air south into the lower 48. It does exactly that. The difference is the timing. This has it towards like the next 2 weeks. Actually, right around, say, November 20th and 21st, we see that little cold air plunge, which I should actually even back up further. The CFS also says that. So I'm beginning to see this come to fruition. Our climate forecast model, our GFS, even the European model to some degree, is showing that by the time we get to that middle to latter part of November is when we really begin to see these bigger cold air regimes move further south into the central United States, portions of the Northeast, and the plains in the upper Midwest, which is what we expect. But this would be more of a consistent cold that I would be trying to forecast for. In short, I am anticipating that between the latter half of November, particularly that last week in November and into December, we're going to see more of a consistent cold air regime for areas that have not experienced it yet. Once again, Midwest, Northeast, Central Plains. And because of that, I expect more of a consistency. We are also transitioning into La Nina, which historically does favor colder air regimes for the northern half of the United States, the Midwest, and even some parts of New England and the Northeast. The important thing to note is while I am forecasting for a below normal winter in terms of temperature for the areas highlighted in black, the areas that I'm about to highlight in pink, I do not see that being the case. I'm talking about Texas, Louisiana, Bama, Mississippi, Florida, the South Atlantic. Not expecting it to be below normal seasonally. I expect it above normal. However, I am beginning to see cold air plunges get as far south as Texas on some of these runs, which is something that I also predicted. I am anticipating at least one major cold event for Texas, similar to that of what we saw in 2021. I don't make that prediction lightly. We all remember what happened in 2021. I believe it was 2021. Where we saw a massive infrastructure failure for Texas. Hopefully things have changed since then, but I am expecting a cold snap to affect much of Texas, at least one major event this year. So, in conclusion of what we talked about tonight, in the near term, the next couple of weeks, I am not anticipating there to be really any change to the current weather pattern we're in. We're going to continue to see some of those mild temperatures for places like the eastern half of the United States, east of the Great Divide, while our below normal temperatures will continue to remain in the Southwest and the Western and Rockies. That's going to be the next couple of weeks. But beyond that point, when we go into late November and December, that's when I am looking to see a bit of a shift there to more of, I guess you could say, back to reality, with some of our below normal temperatures beginning to finally set in more consistently for the areas circled here in black. I want to show you one last product before we depart tonight, and that is more on the climate model front. And I want to show you the latest here on some of the runs we have from the CFS as well as the CAN-SIPS. These are two different climate models that we use to determine our weather patterns as well as general trends we're looking for. So this is the forecast for the CFS in December. And as you can see, the CFS is got a little bit of a warm bias, I would argue, especially saying that, the Midwest, the Gulf, the Rockies, and much of the United States is above normal. And so if we take that at face value, look what happens when we head to January. Look at that flip, right? So we go from pretty above normal for much of the country to January seeing some of that cold air being evicted for, again, northern United States and the Northeast. This pretty much coincides with what short and medium range models are showing now. And the CFS has been showing this the last few months. It really has not changed much. It's very bullish on January and February, especially being below normal overall. And I mentioned February, but there it is, right? So really showing more of that polar jet kicking in, seeing more that blocking pattern to where this consistent cold air digs down into the northern United States. But as that happens, look who's above normal. The southern United States, for the most part. So I will not be surprised by this scenario. As a matter of fact, I'd put my confidence at about 70 to 80% tonight that we do see something similar to what the CFS is outputting. Some of those below normal temperatures really setting in January. Where I disagree on the CFS is it does show mostly above normal for much of the United States. I don't think that that's going to be the case. I think that's a little bit too bullish. I think we will see some below normal temperatures begin to creep in as soon as the first week of December. And so if we head over to the CAN-SIPS, which is another climate model, this is one that I tend to agree with more, at least in the case of December. It does show some of that pocket of below normal temperatures for the northern United States, keeps other areas like the southern half of the United States relatively mild, which will not surprise me in the slightest. But as we go to January and February, look at that, right? Also picking up on most of that cold air of low normal temperatures being for the Midwest. So one last thing, though. I keep delaying me ending this video. But there's one last thing I want to just, clarify as part of my prediction. When we look at this map, so January 2025, once again, when we look at the natural gas market and we see how bearish sentiment it is for this winter season, my guess as a meteorologist, with all the other metrics and variables aside, just focusing specifically on weather, I point to this map as the primary reason why a lot of traders may be concerned about the winter. Because in the grand scheme of things, while I talk about below normal temperatures for the central United States and even to some degree the Northeast, look at the rest of the country. This is a pretty large population swath that is likely not to see really much of the cold at all. And I would not be surprised by that. And if you think about the Midwest, and you think about population there, it's a pretty decent population size, but in no way does it dwarf the southern United States. So that's something I want to just make clear. And that's part of the reason why on WX Rogue we have that population-weighted product, because that really says a lot about general trends when we really factor in who is consuming natural gas, how many people, right? We can say that there's certain regions that are getting more HDD, but we would be totally missing the mark on how much is really truly being consumed. And the only way to truly know that from a weather perspective is by looking at population-weighted cooling and heating degree days. So if you're wondering, here I am making these winter predictions, and you're sitting there wondering, well, Brendan, it just doesn't add up. The general trading sentiment is for a bearish winter. Why are you saying it's going to be below normal? It's because, for me, I am forecasting with an emphasis on regions too. So when I say that we're going to be below normal, be mindful that I'm forecasting below normal temperatures for not everywhere in the United States, but only certain areas. In this case, the Midwest, parts of the Northeast New England, and the north, the upper Midwest as well. It's a very important distinction to make. That being said, I'll just reiterate a prediction I made just a few moments ago. For places like Texas and Oklahoma, I expect at least one Arctic blast to move into your area, especially around January and February. I do not think that this area is immune to it completely. We are in a La Nina pattern that favors cold air being advected further south in latitude. We saw that what happened in 2021. It's happened in other La Nina seasons. I expect for there to be at least one significant cold event in the south, but it will not likely be consistent. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you did enjoy tonight's video. This was a update on our winter outlook forecast for this winter season, as well as talking about those short-term trends. If you have any questions or feedback about tonight's discussion, feel free to post those down in the comments here on YouTube, and also feel free to hit me up in the Weather Rogue Discord channel. Happy to answer any questions, garner any feedback, or just simply have a conversation. Would love to have it. Thank you so much for tuning in, and for those of you that are interested, head on over to the European forecast discussion as we talk about winter 24-25 and HDD CDD trends and forecast for Western and Eastern Europe. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your night, and we will talk soon.